Hey, I'm Terry Newman with Southborough Access Media, and I'm here today with Mr. Jon Delli Priscoli, and he is the owner of the Burnett House here in Southborough. And I asked him here today, he's very graciously come to talk about the Burnett House and what has transpired since August and what will happen next. So I know that you and I have talked a little bit, and you are into the idea of preserving. You've done preservation in the past, so you're very well versed on what needs to happen and the process of it, and that it can be very lengthy. But I know other events have changed for you here, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, giving just a little bit of history to the folks here at home, when I first saw the house, it was advertised as an auction, and the house, for whatever reason, didn't get sold at the auction, and I had approached the seller through their broker a short time afterwards, and they had explained to me that the house was under agreement to some third party.
Okay.
But that particular person chose not to follow through on the purchase of the house. They purchased another house in town, but their goal was to tear the house down. And then, so I was appalled at that, candidly, and I said, you know, there's good bones here, but it needs a tremendous amount of work and so on. So I pushed forward, and I did purchase the house and mothballed it for a period of time. And in my life, you asked me what's changed in my life. Well, as some may out there already know this, during that period of time, along with my other endeavors, I own Edaville Railroad, and I'm in the process right now of doing a massive transformation of that down in Carver. We have now secured the national contract for Thomas the Tank Engine. Will be the first Thomas the Tank Engine theme park in America. There's only two in the world, a small one in Japan and a large one in England. And this will be the first one in America. So my focus is really on that at this moment. And I have struggled with selling my existing house in Sudbury, which the market over there has been dragging a little bit on the upper end. So with all that, when I was approached last summer by a local developer here in town who's built a lot of, just built this huge apartment complex here in town and so forth, you know, it made sense at that point. You know, really, I wasn't addressing the house at that point in time, and he appeared to have a plan. I wasn't 100% sure of what the plan was. Candidly, I thought it was partial reuse as well as additional lots with cottages. Obviously, we all know what took place there, and when that purchase and sales agreement expired, for reasons unknown, on his end, I chose not to renew that and chose instead to work with the local selectmen and the town planner and the town manager to find a solution here that would make everybody happy and maybe provide some momentum to get this house restored. And that's kind of what's been transpiring over the last 4 months. I spent quite a bit of time working with two selectmen who I have not known prior to this meeting, John Rooney and Paul Semino, who I have to say have been, you know, absolutely terrific in working with me and trying to come up with solutions. And and I think we have a plan and a framework that they're both happy with and that I'm happy with. The question is now, is the town going to be happy with this and the other boards and committees in town, and finding a path to resolve this? Because candidly, our goal, my wife and I, our goal would be here to, if the town wants to preserve this property, it needs to be preserved as it currently stands, which is a single family house or something along those lines, not chopped into or modified into other you know, condominiums or something, and not additional building lots built, and which would really ruin the Frederick Law Olmsted designed this, so that would kill the whole bucolic nature of the property. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm a trustee at the Wayside Inn in Sudbury, and we're actively trying to preserve that. And these massive historical properties require so much constant updating and to bring it, to keep them relevant, both from a physical plant nature as well as just the overall maintenance and everything else that we have to do. it's very costly.
And I think you were explaining to me that the property itself, without the building, is valued at a certain amount, and then to transform this into something that's back to its original single-family home, it's going to be a lengthy process, a very costly process. So there is the decision for you to make on what would be best for you. And
well,
where are you with that?
I'm a community person. People that know me, that have known me for 35 years in business, know that. I've worked very hard in Marlborough, doing a lot of things for the community. I serve on the Wayside Inn Board, as I mentioned to you, trying to preserve that for the long term.
You're very busy.
Very busy. And I'm also serving on a school rebuilding committee and a fire station committee and on the building committee down in the town of Carver, which is where Edaville is. And I'm busy with that. And I also run the Grafton, Upton Railroad up the street here. So I'm pretty busy. But that fact aside, I think I have a concept that would work well here. And to go back to what you said as far as what the values are, when the last deal did not go forward, I had the house appraised, and at that point in time, ironically, and people might find this interesting, that the house is actually a detriment to the value of this property. Looking at it just strictly from a dollars and cents perspective, with no value given to the cultural nature of which to me is everything.
Sure.
But banks don't look at that. They look at what is the bottom dollar, and the bottom dollar here is that this property is worth more money, basically what they call scraped, which is all the old buildings removed, and 4 building lots here for 4 new homes.
Okay.
And Southborough is very popular today, the very strong real estate market here in Southborough. People are very interested in Southborough. This is a wonderful location. It's an absolutely beautiful spot, which is, I think, the reason why Joseph Burnett picked it 150 years ago.
Of course, 1849, I believe?
1847.
47, okay.
So with that, what we've come up with is that value was 2.1 for the 4 lots, and what I've worked with the selectmen over the last 4 months, trying to come up with a scenario that would work very well for the town and well for us as a family,
Sure.
would be to preserve the entire property, not have any of the lots sold off, put a permanent restriction on the property, so no demolish permit would ever be, there'd be a no demolition clause for the house and all the outbuildings, which there are 3 other outbuildings. There's a carriage house, there's the original Episcopal church, which is actually a chapel, and then there's a little summer building, a little Gothic, a glorified gazebo, but still standing.
And so what you would need then is to have the boards or the people in Southborough all come together in order to, that's what you're asking for.
Right. Well, what I'm asking for is if this is the cultural resource that I feel it is, and that the town feel it is, and I think based on last summer's outcry of Mr. Moss's refusal to even talk to the town about any alternatives, I think it's obvious that we have to come to grips with, is this an important cultural piece of the town or isn't it? Obviously, I think it is, and I think most people think it would be as well. So the scenario we came up with, the selectmen and I, on a conceptual basis. Nobody's voted anything, and nobody's said this is definite one way or the other. This is just discussions and working together. And I tried to provide as much ample time for that as I could. I'm very concerned that the reason that I applied for a demolition permit and the reason I had an A&R plan signed several months ago is because I need to protect the integrity of the value of this property until the final decision is made as to what we're going to do. I can't have a situation where rights are taken away by some kind of regulation or some kind of last-minute town meeting or whatever. I know what the rights are. I want them preserved until the final solution is determined with the selectmen and the town at large and myself.
And I see you've maintained the lot. The grass is nicely mowed and...
Well, yes, you'll look at the house, you'll see the front door is boarded, and the simple reason for that is in the back door as well, because they're both the original period doors with the house. And my gutters were stolen off the house this summer.
And salvaged, I think.
Salvaged, exactly. They were scrapped. And I know that simply because the police did find the person ultimately, but there's no restitution available to us for that. And and I didn't want to have the period doors or the glass, which is really irreplaceable, and the lock sets and all the beautiful bronze carvings and things. I didn't want any of that touched, so I boarded that up until we could figure this out. I was really hoping, candidly, that we could reach resolution sooner than this. Originally, when I sat with the selectmen and the town manager, we had talked about an October town meeting to kind of fish or cut bait on the preservation of this property. But the selectmen needed more time, and I graciously gave that to them. But we're at a point now where I think the town needs to decide, do they want this? And there's been a proposal put forward, and on the 18th of November, that proposal will be fully ferreted out at a public meeting with the selectmen and anybody who's interested, and I'll be there myself answering any questions asked of us. But my goal here is giving up the equity on the future building lots and everything else and preserving the property. I need to get reimbursed for a percentage of that. Not the whole thing, but a percentage of that. And that funding will be put back into the house, plus additional funding, which will then restore this house to its splendor of the 19th century. The other neat thing about this is I've also agreed to grant the town of Southborough a right of first refusal on this house. So in the event that it leaves my immediate family for any purpose, the town would have first dibs on taking this house over. And they also have the right to assign that to an institution such as St. Mark's or Faith School or historical mass. So the town would have control on this property long term. This icon would be preserved, just like the Wayside Inn is to Sudbury, and featured on their annual meetings, and featured on even the Pepperidge Farm cookie bags have the Wayside Inn gristmill on there.
So everyone would win.
So everybody would win in this case. So
but nothing comes free. The property is going to take a certain amount of money to...
A couple of $1 million to restore it.
To bring back.
And you'll never see that out of it, you know, from a resale. So
needs insulation,
it needs complete. And when we walk through today, you'll see all that. It needs everything. And I knew that. It's just, in reality, chopping off potential equity of the house and taking, you know, basically putting a tidal cloud on this, a restriction on this property, basically will take the value of what is here today and strip that away. But that's an agreement, and the consideration that the town is being asked to come up with through the Community Preservation Act, which, by the way, really addresses 3 points: affordable housing, which I don't feel this comes under, but historic preservation and open space, which is right in the wheelhouse of this particular effort, would fit like a glove for the town and have this landmark. Another thing that we had agreed to do with the town was once a year invite the school kids in to come visit and see the house, and as basically a cultural experience. So I would open the house up for the public. So I think we're really a team player with the town on this, and I would hope that people would see that. I think some people see the fact, oh, it's 1.3 million and this and all that. What they don't understand is that it's actually worth a lot more just leveled. So I think we have to look at what's really here, and is it worth preserving, and do we want to all get behind it? I'm making the commitment to do it. I'm curious if everybody else is willing to do it. I think the two selectmen I met with are obviously see the benefit of it. But, you know, we'll see at this meeting coming up.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you again for coming today and talking with us, and I look forward to seeing what the house looks like inside.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are inside the house today. My name is Terry Newman, and I'm with Southborough Access Media, and I'm here with Jon Delli Priscoli, and he is graciously allowed us to come inside the house and see what it really looks like. And we were talking a little bit earlier, and I'm hoping you'll expand on this, that you actually are very involved with preservation, very familiar with it, and so maybe you could talk about that some more.
Well, I am very involved in preservation. I am currently serving, I'm the second longest serving trustee at the Wayside Inn, so I'm involved in that aspect of it. But I also restored our summer home, which happens to be next to Edaville, is the William Savory House, which is known as Leyden Cottage, down on South Main Street on Route 58 in Carver, Mass. A lot of people probably haven't been in that neck of the woods, but it's a very historical area. William Savory, just like Mr. Burnett being an industrialist, was also an industrialist, but in a different way. He and his family, his father and grandfather, were in the iron ore business and munitions business out of Philadelphia, and they were very close friends with the DuPonts. So the DuPonts made the gunpowder, and they made the cannonballs. In fact, the cannonballs that are on the Constitution today that you see in Boston Harbor were made by William Savory's business. And this was William Savory's house, and I bought it from his direct heirs with all the paperwork and all the history and all the paintings. This house, the Burnett House, was stripped of all the archival contents. There's no paintings or furniture when I purchased it. But when I bought the William Savory house, I bought the entire contents, the family history, everything, and I gave a lot of it to the local library, and also had a lot of it conserved and is hanging in the house currently. So we restored that. That was a very similar period, 1852, what's called a Gothic revival. And we did that here, and several people in Southborough who I'm friendly with have been there and seen the house and the restoration quality of it. And I think I could bring those skills to this effort here. I know how to do it. I know the business in the sense of what needs to be done inside, having done it, and having almost 40 years in construction background. I would be very confident in bringing this to its former glory, which is what I'd like to do.
And in just looking at the room that we're standing in today, we are looking at studs and we are looking at stones.
Right. This is the former kitchen, which was not original, Terry, to the house.
Okay.
I mean, in the sense of the fit of in other words, the way that was fitted out was not original. This was a 1930s rebuild. Typically, in the 19th century, the kitchens were always in the basement, and that's how a lot of times they did it. And they would bring the food up through, and wait staff, and a lot of the older houses always had two staircases, as this one does, one for staff and one for the front. They always made sure the back staircase was of a lesser quality. In the back rooms where the staff stayed, the trim and everything was a little lesser quality because there was a lot of class distinction in that era, which is a very subtle thing when you see old houses. I find fascinating is how really just the way people, what's evolved in America since then. But that was true here. Now this particular kitchen here is going to be the kitchen going forward. It's been fully gutted, and this would end up being a very French style kitchen, which is the house's French empire. So what going forward, it would be a French style kitchen with a lot of exposed stone, and modern but very retro in its appeal.
Okay.
But not original.
I can hear the passion.
There's a lot of passion
that you are when you talk about the house and the projects that you've done, and you are not a fearless man or shrinking violet by any sense of the word, because you this is quite a project. We are looking at pipes hanging, insulation hanging, strapping.
It's a couple of $1 million to do the house probably in the end. I think there's a limited market for the house, even in its finished state, because a lot of people want more of a modern house today. People like more modern amenities. They really don't necessarily like the period look of a house. To me, I like old houses, so I'm attracted to the old houses, and I think it's very important that people realize that you can't make something new make it legitimately old. No matter how hard you try, a replica is still a replica. I can spot it a mile away, versus a period house with all its little nuances. But that's what makes it interesting. Is the layout is unique to it. This house is very nicely laid out. There are some redundant bedrooms and things, but there is good bones in this house, and this house could be very, very thoughtfully and carefully restored. At great expense, but I think it would be, I honestly think it would be an absolute testament to the town of Southborough as a public-private partnership here in this thing. But more than that, people drive by and have enjoyed this view for decades, never really knowing what's going on and whatever, but they know they love it. And I can understand why. This was my neighborhood. I want to be sure that that's what would be there. And I think that's very, very achievable here. And I think working together, as we had spoken about, I think is very real. But the work that's involved, the knowledge. I want to make sure you're comfortable and the public at large is comfortable knowing that I know this background. I know what is period and correct for 1847. And my wife and I, as I mentioned to you, are voracious antique collectors, artifacts and things of that nature, and we have a very large continental collection of furniture and so on, which would fit beautifully in this house. You know,
I'm going to guess also that you probably are very fond, and by the sounds of what you're talking about, very fond of the historical aspect, possibly in the line of, well, who has passed over this threshold? And while I attempted to do some research, there were a lot of names. I think there was at least one president that I saw in there, but there has to be quite a history that is part of that.
When you dig in these houses, you really find it's like it's a lot of fun. You know, you see those shows on TV, which I find so fascinating, like on Channel 2, the History Uncovered, and they do the research of the people's backgrounds and their heirs. Well, I did that on my William Savory house, which is Leyden Cottage, as I mentioned earlier, and he was an interesting character because he wanted to provide literacy. He thought literacy was the key in churches that were non-denominational. In other words, everybody could attend without any type of prior pre-clearance, so to speak. Well, anyway, William Savory was, as I said, was loved literacy, and was a very generous man to the town. And he established the first library in the town and gave it all its books. But here's the best part: he was best friends with Charles Dickens. Okay. And Charles Dickens was like a rock star in the 19th century. People may not realize this. Okay, he would come, he would have readings and so on, and he came to America twice. Once earlier in life, once very late in life, a couple of years prior to his death. And he would go through, and you would go to a reading, you would pay to have a reading and so on. But he was personal friends with Charles Dickens, and we have documentation that he stayed at our home and so on. With and I. Unrelated to this, how small the world it is, my wife and I collect first edition Charles Dickens. So I have, so we have, so there's a lot of excitement. So when you really, peel back the onion on these houses, you find that really it's America's history here and the wonderful ways people lived. And there's some things in the past that we're not crazy about, but a lot of things, there's wonderful cultural aspects that come forward, and
it's right
that's
here.
That's right here, and I'd love to, as I discover all that and work with the historical committees and so on. I think what a great story to tell the kids and future generations. Have them come in maybe during Christmas or something when the house is fully decorated, and be able to enjoy the grounds in the house and so on. So that's kind of that might sound kind of glamorous or blue sky, but I think it would be a lot of fun to do that. Would be nice.
That is fantastic. Well, I'm anxious to see the rest of the house. Sure. Thank you so much. Let's go. So, John, tell me, what room are we in now?
Well, this room was the receiving room. In the 19th century, when you were a guest and you came and you had a calling card, and they would an actual card, you would come to the front. You'd be greeted by a servant, and that person would seat you here. In this room here, you would not be just brought into the main body of the house until the people who lived here were prepared to receive you, or if they wanted to receive you. That was decorum in the 19th century, in this level.
That is fantastic. And as I'm looking around here, you can see the walls are peeling, and it's probably horsehair plaster, I'm guessing. And there is a lovely fireplace here that I think you said it was brought from Italy.
Right. All the artisans that built this house were from Italy. I discovered when I opened up some of the ceilings, hand-painted ceilings, which is a huge thing in the mid-19th century. The house in Carver is all loaded with these frescoes with flying cherubs and so on, and that's what this was like. The Sistine Chapel basically is what they did. That was a very romantic period. They brought so the artisans from Italy would come here, and they did the stone cutting and the mantles and so on. I'm sure there was Americans involved as well, but the Italians were known as the stone carvers of the day.
And off the top of your head, how many rooms are there?
Well, in its current configuration, there's 11 bedrooms in the house, but some of those bedrooms are really very small. And the configuration that we worked out with the architect was to turn it into 8 bedrooms, all with their own bathroom.
And I think you mentioned earlier that there's a fireplace in...
There'd be a fireplace in every bedroom. There is even in all of them, so some rooms would end up with 2 fireplaces. But all the rooms have fireplaces today.
Okay.
They all need, but there's an example. To make them safe, they all have to be lined. You just can't use them the way they currently are. So they all have to have a lining put in them to keep them safe. That's one of the biggest causes of house fires is bad, worn out bricks of pine tar pitch that could have been in there for a century and catches fire, and that would take the whole house out. So we have to line them to keep them safe.
Okay.
That's just one example. And typically on these older houses, the cap, so you have to tear the chimney down to the roof line and then rebuild above, because that usually takes a lot of weather and there's a lot of fracturing. So you have to keep the water out of that chimney, so you have to make it in proper flashing and so on, so that has to be done. And then once you start that, then you're involved with the slate up there and the flashing, the counter flashing. That all has to be done in copper. The slate roof is in reasonable shape in this house. But just to give you an example, the slate roof in this house, to fix it and the gutter work and the cornice work is probably $200,000.
Okay.
Just to do that aspect, nothing else. You haven't done anything yet. You're just doing the upstairs.
Okay, thank you, John. We are in, I guess I don't even know what you would call this room.
This is a ballroom.
Ballroom, okay. And you can see from the height of the ceilings and the incredible detail on the carvings of the woodwork, flowers, I guess. And you're explaining to me that some of the woodwork's been painted over, but underneath there's something else.
Right. Over the years, what happened in these old houses, because in the 1950s and 1960s, these houses fell greatly out of favor. They were really just arcs in the view of the public. They weren't preserved, with some exceptions, but so the ones that survived had the original family still in them, and they just didn't do anything. This house is no exception. They really didn't do anything bad, but they just didn't do anything. They just basically kept it the way it was. And occasionally they just paint and freshen up the paint. Well, the woodworks that you see here in this house, the cornice work and so forth, the egg and dart, that's all original cornice. And that's done with plaster over wood, which is called gesso. And the gesso is a plastering, and then they slightly carve it. And then they typically gild it with gold. Okay. And that's how it was done in the 19th century. It was a very opulent. This was a way to, just like when the curtains would hang, the drapes would hang in the room, the amount of fluffing at the bottom of the flow, the waterfall would show that you were wealthy. And that was a big thing to project to people in those days. In the 19th century, they were projecting that they were a family of means, opulence. Like this mantle here, as you see, is white Carrara marble done with the other marble. And I mean, today, the only place you'd ever find something like this would be in a salvage situation, and from a house like this that was torn down, and then you'd have to retrofit it in. But this is original, and this is an example. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about what was there? What was there? I'm certain what was there is what's called a pier mirror, which is a large overmantel mirror, which would have been gilded and very possibly would have had faces or cherubs at the top and a lot of scrolling, and just a wonderful piece, which would be, those are the type of things that we would put back into the house.
Okay, John, explain where we are now, please.
Well, this is an alcove that, the way the house was being used during the 20th century is this room, which was potentially added later, I'm not certain of that, but the way the room was being used was definitely a later conversion. And what happened was the Garfields put a false ceiling in and took away the slope ceiling that you see in this room. This room was originally a billiard room, which we're converting to a dining room. So this would be restored as an original 19th century dining room, which it very well may have been originally.
Okay, it's beautiful. I can see these fabulous, solid pocket doors on either side. It's very grand with the arch up top, and not something that you would see. And as you said, I think artisans came from Italy or from wherever, near and far, to create this great masterpiece.
A lot of the carpenters in the day were actually from Germany, and the rock masons and stone masons and brick masons were all from Italy. And that's really what, during the 19th century, that's how it was done.
Okay, so we are touring the house, and John, we are where now?
We're in what I would consider what I call the main library, or really what was in the 19th century is the gentleman's sitting room. And this is where Mr. Burnett would have, once people got through the clearance area there, they would come in here and they would sit and discuss business matters or visitations or personal matters, whatever. This would be primarily a gentleman's room. And that's why you see the darker colors, the coffered ceilings, the more masculine mantels, and the French walnut floor and parquet, which needs major restoration, but it is salvageable, and all the walnut wood and so on. So this was done, and the reason it was used as French walnut is because the house is French Empire, and he was at that particular moment. He really wanted every French aspect of the house, so the materials that were used were very French. The design, the colors, the coins on the outside. The overall looks like a French countryside house that you'd see in Normandy or something. That's what this is, and the French walnut just continues with that. But this would have been his sitting room.
And the views, looking out these...
This is a very nice view because he has the direct water view and...
windows that would overlook the estate, so
That's
he
right.
could see people coming and going, I would
That's right.
imagine.
That's
coming
right.
up in the carriage and
Well, the carriageway would be
view
right
what
there.
his accomplishments.
That's right. Yes, one of the things on the outside of the house we didn't speak of when we were first speaking, that little stone abutment there was originally a porch there. So people would come in a carriageway. So people would come in, and it was a very elegant period of time. People would come in, they would greet, it was an all-day affair. They would come in, greet, visit, have their calling card, as I said, go into that room for discussing whether they're going to visit with them or not, and then they would come into the study here. Yeah, it's not just a house; it's a history. It's a way. It's a lifestyle of long forgotten, but really part of our heritage. And I think these are the stories that you really can't put a price on.
And it's hard to believe we're this close to Route 9 and a lot of hustle and bustle. The feeling in here is calm, it's regal, it's majestic.
It is, and keep in mind that Joseph Burnett at one time owned all the land between here and Route 9.
Really?
It was called Deerfoot Farm. He owned hundreds of acres here, and he also had a house in Boston, downtown. That's where his chemistry business was, and that's where he invented the vanilla extract. But he had the farm out here, and they made sausages, they had the bottled milk, all kinds of other interesting things that I've learned that I was not aware of, that I've just found fascinating, that just beg to drill down a lot more on the history, which to me, that's what makes it so special.
Okay, I would describe this room as a bedroom and yet another fireplace.
Yes.
You are correct in your assertion, fireplace in every room. And
Well, that's how they heated the rooms.
And I'm looking around, our viewers can't see it, but there are many drawers, many doors, very large windows that I would describe as potentially doors in themselves that overlook the beautiful views of the property and the trees, the leaves turning, and what else would you like to describe?
Well, keep in mind when
here?
you looked out in the period of when this house was built, the grounds were all Frederick Law Olmsted designed, which is the same person that did the Boston Public Gardens and so on, and all the Mount Auburn Cemetery, all the some of the most famous landscapes around. So no expense was spared, having that. He was a celebrity landscape architect at the time. The interesting thing about this room is if you look at this over here with these drawers and everything, that was added probably in the 1930s is my estimate of 40s. That would never have been the case. They didn't have many closets in the 19th century. What they did have is beautiful antique, which now are antique, which would have been of the day at the period, armoires. That's how it was all done in the day. They would have armoires, so the closets were actually furniture, not built-ins. That's a mid-20th century add-on, which would be completely removed in this remodeling.
Clearly you know your periods.
I do. The floor here is a French walnut, once again, strip walnut, excuse me. And this room needs quite a bit of work. But once again, when you just on this, like for instance on that woodwork, you just can't paint over the woodwork. What has to happen is This is how we did the house in Carver. All the wood has to be stripped in place to bare wood, and then sanded, and then filled, and then repainted. Other than that, you're wasting your time.
A lengthy process.
It's a very lengthy and costly process. There's probably a good year and a half's work for 5 men just on the paint stripping. Wow. In this house is what I estimate.
That's impressive.
Inside.
Inside. Okay.
Fortunately, most of the outside's stone, and I think you can get most of the outside trim done with a pressure washer and some sanding. But inside, you don't have that option. Inside is very painstakingly done with heat guns and stripped very carefully and in an environmentally sensitive way, so you have to do all that. But once again, that's what's required in these old houses. When they're done, though, there's nothing like it.
Okay, John, I really would like to thank you today, but before we go, can you please explain where we are? We are on, for our viewers at home, we are on the 3rd floor. The views are stunning. All of the property overlooks all of the other buildings, the schools in town, the road out front. I think you said the carriage house?
Yes.
And where are we?
You're actually on the 3rd floor, which is another grand bedroom up here. Once again, with a nice Carrara marble fireplace. And this room is very interesting because of the height. If you notice, this room is actually higher, and they took full advantage of the high ceilings because of the mansard aspect of the outside of the roof. And what's really nice about this particular house is that all the doorways and all the knobs, you can see the glass knobs, or in some cases, which I found fascinating, mercury glass knobs. Really? Which I've never seen in a house. I've seen them in books, but I've never seen. This house has all the original knobs for the most part, at least 90%. So those are the small things that you just can never, and that's what I mentioned to you earlier, that a lot of people that own these houses really didn't restore them, but they didn't destroy them either. They just just let them go, which is what happened here. But when you get a house like that hasn't had the 1960s or 1970s remodelings, which basically destroyed a lot of old houses past the point of return, this house here is really like a barn find. If you found an old car that's been sitting there since the 30s, that's what this house is. This house has all the bones, has everything you need to make it a beautiful period restoration, and all the original ingredients, but it needs everything. As I mentioned to you earlier, complete mechanical system. There's nothing here to save. The electrical system is 100% replacement. The plumbing system is 100% replacement. The air conditioning and the heating system is non-existent. All the fixtures and so forth, for the most part, are obsolete and you can't be reused. They're not practical for today's life. And then, of course, the painting, the decorating, the wood stripping, the floor refinishing, the insulation, as I mentioned to you, that, how you drill the old walls and fill it and then replaster it, and the plastering, the gilding. It goes on, and before you know it, you've had a lot of fun, but you've spent a lot of money.
You have to be very passionate.
You have to be passionate about it, but you also have to be practical, and that's what, we're weighing, the effort. And that's why the situation is where it is today, discussing this in an open, candid forum.
Well, I really look forward to hearing what will happen. I believe you mentioned November 18th.
I did.
And
I just want to say one thing. I just want to say that I think that the town has been wonderful to work with. I found everybody at Town Hall, in the boards that I have been in front of, which has been the Planning Board. I was in front of the Conservation Commission in the past, and the few selectmen and so on, the town planner. I found everybody to be very, very genuine and willing to work and try to find solutions. But this is not up to them, and it's not up to me. It's really up to everybody, and everybody has a voice in this. And I'm hoping people make their feelings known on the 18th. And if they want to move forward, I'm a willing partner. And if they don't, then we'll see where it goes from there. But I'd like to keep a real positive outlook on this and have this really become as I mentioned to you, like Rome, like the Colosseum is to Rome, this house is to Southborough, and I want to be sure that that's what people see it as.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming today.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.